This is an ABC podcast.
Good morning and welcome to AM. I'm Kim Landers. The Australian government says it's not satisfied with a long-awaited report into the origins of the coronavirus. The World Health Organisation's investigators believe the virus was transmitted from bats to humans via another animal, and they think it's very unlikely it leaked from a Chinese lab. But Australia says it's concerned about transparency. Europe correspondent Nick Dole reports from London.
Just over the Thames, across from the Houses of Parliament, people are painting little red hearts on a wall in the sunshine. There's thousands of hearts there already, and there'll soon be one for every person who's died with COVID-19 here in the pandemic. That's over 150,000 by some counts. AM came across Fran Hall, who'd been painting all day. How's the wrist feeling?
Yeah, the wrist's okay. The fingers are a bit weary, but yeah, we've done a lot. We've done a lot of hearts. The reason I'm here is because my husband, I married him in September, and he died in October. So we were married for 3 weeks. So his name is Steve. This is stopping people in their tracks. Quite literally, people are stopping and looking and recognising that each heart represents one person who's died and one family.
Many of these families want answers about how their own government managed the crisis, but they also want to know how this kind of thing can be avoided and where it came from. Overnight, the WHO tried to answer some of those questions. Following a trip to Wuhan earlier this year, a team of experts has found that the virus was likely passed from bats to humans via another animal. Professor Thea Fisher was part of the team. She says it's still not clear exactly when the virus took hold.
And so far, we have not been able to document any substantial transmission of SARS coronavirus in the months preceding the outbreak in December. However, we cannot exclude that there have been milder cases and there might have been smaller epidemics that have gone under the radar.
Dr. Peter Ben Emberek led the fact-finding mission. He says Chinese authorities didn't grant investigators access to all the raw data they were seeking. He says on the evidence at hand, the theory that the virus escaped from a lab doesn't stack up, but he can't rule it out either.
Lab accidents, of course, do happen once in a while. We've seen that throughout history in many places. It's not impossible that could have happened.
Australia was one of the key countries pushing for an inquiry, and it's already said it's not satisfied. In a joint statement with the US, UK and other countries, it's expressed concern with delays in the investigation and the lack of data investigators were granted. It says an independent investigation that's free from interference is essential. Peter Ben Emberek says there was pressure from China, but he says there was pressure from everyone.
Of course, there was political pressure from all sides, also outside China. But I think we were able to create a space for the science. We were never pressured to remove critical elements in our report.
The head of the World Health Organization has already said parts of the investigation weren't extensive enough, and more work is needed to determine how the pandemic began. This is Nick Dole in London reporting for AM.
As we wait to see if the lockdown in Greater Brisbane is going to be extended over Easter, a hospital connected to one of the region's 2 COVID clusters has been locked down. The Princess Alexandra Hospital is now only taking patients in emergencies, while some staff at the Mater Hospital have been sent home after it was confirmed an infected person visited the private maternity section. And it's still not known if the outbreak in Queensland's capital has spread to other parts of the state or jumped the border into New South Wales. Annie Guest reports from Brisbane.
Her shopping trolley is full, but 46-year-old Celia Walford is not stockpiling.
I don't have the money to do that. I just go by the week. So if we run out, we'll use something else for toilet paper.
She doesn't have a car, so she and her young son are waiting for a ride-share home from the shopping centre at Capera in North Brisbane. Usually, Celia Walford would be at her dog grooming job.
Can't work for this 3 days.
Does it weigh heavily on you?
It is at the moment, yeah. I've got 4 kids plus an extra at home, and they're teenagers, except for this one, so they eat a lot. So, yeah, it's a bit of a worry.
And any holiday plans over Easter that you're now reviewing?
We're going to go camping for a couple of days, so we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
What about you, mate? What do you think about your Easter camping?
That you get to explore.
Exploration is something tourism businesses are desperately hoping people are able to do over Easter. But with growing cases among 2 COVID clusters in Greater Brisbane, people are nervous about their holiday plans, even 1,700 kilometres away in the COVID-free city of Cairns.
We've seen a little bit of concern there and some cancellations. People are on tenterhooks waiting to see what happens with the Brisbane lockdown.
Michael Chase-Smith is the Executive Director of Orbit Travel Agency.
I'm fearing for travel agents and particularly tourism operators and hospitality and, restaurants and cafes in far north Queensland and that sort of thing that there could be more cancellations.
So what's your advice to those travellers who ring up your agency and question whether they should cancel their plans for those areas outside the lockdown area?
At the moment, we'd say just hold firm for the moment and hope this lockdown doesn't go on any longer.
The fate of many businesses and travellers this Easter will depend in large part on the number of new COVID cases today and tomorrow. Here's University of Queensland virologist Dr. Kirsty Short.
I think if you see 10, that's a lot of cases. And that sheer number would be potentially a point of concern because, potentially they've been out in the community infecting individuals. But the scenario where I could see lockdown being lifted is if we see one case or so that's already linked to the cluster, and then the next day we see one case that's linked to the cluster.
So given in the previous 2 24-hour periods there were 4 new cases and then 8 new cases, isn't the most likely scenario that it will be 8 or more for the next 24-hour period?
Not necessarily, no, because it depends on how much those individuals were out in the community and it depends on how widespread this is transmitted.
Virologist Dr. Kirsty Short from the University of Queensland ending Annie Guest's report. For some people who get infected with COVID-19, the effects last a long time. Doctors at St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney have released a study showing that some patients are still battling symptoms 8 months later, and in some cases it's quite severe, as Jane Barden reports.
Derek Young and his wife Gabriella contracted COVID-19 on their way back from France last March. For the 6 weeks that followed, the Sydney holiday rental small business owner was very ill.
I had severe fever, lots of trembling and incredible fatigue. I literally was sleeping 22 hours out of every 24. I also had lots of aches and pain and then brain fog, so I just was very dazed, for want of a better word. I couldn't do my internet banking, so I couldn't pay my suppliers.
He remained very breathless and fatigued for 8 months and still has heart problems.
So I've got about 80% plaque in and around the arteries.
His wife Gabriella was even worse.
She had severe respiratory issues. She was hospitalised 3 times, and she's still got a lot of those symptoms now.
The couple are among 100 people who got coronavirus, studied by doctors at St Vincent's Hospital over 8 months to establish how many suffer on with what they're calling long COVID. Professor Gail Matthews explains the project has backed up international research, which found women are more likely to experience the ongoing debilitating conditions than men.
We don't know the reason for that yet. There are some conditions that females are more predisposed to, autoimmune conditions. It may be because the women have a different immunological profile.
David Darley is another lead researcher.
32% of patients are still reporting persistent symptoms at 8 months after their infection. And in 20% of patients, they're still reporting major symptoms like shortness of breath, fatigue, or chest pain.
Has that tallied with the results of other people's studies in other places as well?
We're one of the first groups internationally to publish our 8-month follow-up findings. And it does correlate with other research groups that are reporting persistent symptoms.
Have you been surprised by how long these symptoms have persisted?
We are surprised. It's not normal for a viral infection to last this long.
Some patients may have lasting damage.
And they're the patients that are more at risk of having long-term lung injury with lung scarring, and they might have changes in their heart function.
Derek Young is hoping the whole community will take note.
The long-haul symptoms are real, are serious, and when it comes to playing our part as a community, it is important to continue to practice good COVID-safe practices.
Long COVID sufferer Derek Young talking to Jane Barden. Do you remember the last election campaign when the government said Labor was trying to end the weekend and take away tradies' utes with its push for electric cars? Well, that scare campaign hasn't put Labor off because it's now promising cheaper electric vehicles if it wins the next election. And it's also using its national conference to launch another energy policy, declaring it'll install 400 medium-sized solar-powered batteries in suburbs and towns to help cut power bills. From Canberra, here's political reporter James Glenday.
The Labor conference may be virtual, but it still features live entertainment. And last night, Jimmy Barnes was a warm-up act for an opposition leader who now has a spring in his step.
Scott Morrison leads a government that is out of ideas, it's out of touch, and at the next election, they should be out of office.
A few weeks ago, there was serious grumbling about Anthony Albanese's leadership. Now, with the coalition gripped by crisis, he's trying to put as much pressure as he can on the Prime Minister.
A man who doesn't hold a hose, won't hold an inquiry, and never, ever accepts responsibility.
Senior members of the opposition say the conference is a chance to start getting the party ready for an election. They say they've learned the mistakes of the disastrous 2019 campaign. The list of policy promises has been thinned out. But today, Labor is rolling out two new ones that it hopes will have broad voter appeal. The first, a plan to reduce the cost of electric cars by exempting many models from import tariffs and fringe benefit tax.
Yeah, I mean, this is the type of federal government leadership that we've been calling out for.
Bayad Jafari from the Electric Vehicle Council says Australia currently trails the rest of the world, though he believes Labor's policy will make a substantial difference.
One of the benefits of being a global laggard in electric vehicle take-up is that we know what works. And so things like reducing taxes on electric vehicles helps bring more affordable models to our market in the first place, and then actually helps more people get in them, buy them and start driving them around. These are policies that have been put in place right around the world.
The opposition is also committing to building 400 medium-sized batteries in suburbs and towns to take better advantage of household solar. About 20% of homes have rooftop solar panels, but far fewer have battery storage, which means during peak periods in the evening or when the sun doesn't shine, they are reliant on the grid. Craig Emerson, a former Gillard government minister who is now at the McKell Institute, believes the upfront cost of batteries puts many households off and thinks medium-sized suburb batteries are the answer.
Community batteries could be to the 2020s what the solar revolution has been to the last couple of decades. It's a lot more efficient. It helps keep downward pressure on electricity prices, and it's just a lot cheaper overall to have one community battery than, say, have 100 batteries on 100 households.
Former Labor Minister Craig Emerson, who's now with the McKell Institute, speaking with our political reporter James Glenday in Canberra. There are renewed concerns about a commonly used herbicide. Paraquat is banned in more than 30 countries, including the UK, Europe and China, but is widely used by Australian farmers under strict regulations. National Regional Affairs reporter Jess Davis has the story.
When Julie Terry's severely autistic son Damien accidentally drank the herbicide Paraquat, she was told he had 12 hours to live.
It's approximately 10 mils that would kill an adult male, which, is not much more than a sip. The doctors were pretty convinced that he wouldn't make it.
The dangerous chemical was in a Coke bottle in the disabled toilet at a local sporting ground. But by some miracle, he survived.
We kept our hopes up, and after he'd survived the first 24, 48 hours, we were then told that Paraquat can have a delayed effect.
4 years later, her son is doing well, but Julie Terry doesn't know what long-term impacts the poisoning might have. She wants to see Paraquat phased out in Australia.
Wouldn't it be far better not to have to use it at all? I just think the risks really do outweigh the benefits.
We're aware of how toxic it is. We take all of the precautions that we have to be safe with it.
Jake Hamilton is a farmer from Condamine in Queensland's Western Downs. For him, paraquat is an essential tool for weed control.
This last rain has brought up a good flush of weeds. Need to keep all our weeds down and keep the country clean. It would be a huge loss for Australian agriculture in general if we were to lose this product.
Paraquat poisonings in Australia are relatively rare. In 2012, a farmer died after weed killer sprayed in his mouth accidentally. But in developing countries, paraquat ingestion has long been a common cause of death by suicide. And now new questions are being raised about the chemical branded as gramoxone.
Tonight we can reveal that for all those decades, Syngenta and its predecessor companies had safer versions on the shelf, ready to go, but only if gramoxone got banned.
This week, a BBC investigation uncovered secret company documents suggesting the maker Syngenta had safer but more costly alternatives that it held back from consumers to protect its profits. Syngenta rejects the allegations and denies its decisions were motivated by anything other than the desire to make paraquat safer. The company told AM,
Syngenta Australia's paraquat products are safe for people and the environment when used for their intended purpose and according to the registered label instructions.
In Australia, paraquat has been under review since 1997 by Australia's chemical regulator, the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority. In a statement, it said that review has been delayed by fresh data from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, released 18 months ago. They expect a decision to be finalised at the end of this year. Even so, Julie Terry doesn't understand why it's taking so long to assess the chemical that poisoned her son.
My husband and I wrote to the APVMA and we got a lovely letter back, but no real reason as to why it's taking so long. 24 years to me seems absurd.
Julie Terry ending that report by Jess Davis. Australia's Air Force Chief says planning has begun for a new military space command as world powers jostle for supremacy in the skies well above Earth. Today, members of the RAAF are gathering around the country to celebrate 100 years of their organisation. Here's Defence correspondent Andrew Green.
In the skies above Canberra, vintage aircraft have been staging spectacular flypasts in the lead-up to today's centenary celebrations. Overseeing this big birthday bash is Royal Australian Air Force Chief Mel Hupfeld.
Our theme for the centenary is then, now, always. And that's not a bad strategic marker to take forward as the current Chief of Air Force.
As the RAAF celebrates its first 100 years, it's firmly focused on its next century and the final frontier of space.
We're certainly very much responding to the need to secure access to space and ensure that it's available for all.
Air Marshal Hupfeld is leading a space domain review, which includes plans for a possible new ADF Space Command, which would likely draw together all of the military's current capabilities and expertise. His report is due to be completed by Christmas, and the Air Force Chief warns Australia has no time to waste.
And I think, we're probably about 3 or 4 years behind where I would rather be at the moment. But we're catching up quickly.
Among the aircraft taking to the skies today above Canberra's Lake Burley Griffin will be the controversial Joint Strike Fighter.
The world's most advanced combat aircraft, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter.
Despite years of negative headlines and eye-watering costs, the Air Force Chief is adamant the F-35 is essential for the defence of Australia.
It will gather information while it's flying. It has the ability to shoot like a fighter, but it can suck information in and it can distribute that through our networks to a soldier on the ground, to a sailor on a ship, and it can bring us back very coherently as part of the joint force.
But as the Air Force rapidly embraces uncrewed platforms, Air Marshal Hupfeld dismisses suggestions the Joint Strike Fighter will be the final RAAF aircraft to actually require a human being to be in the cockpit.
Defence correspondent Andrew Green. And that is AM for today. Thanks for your company. I'm Kim Landers.
Hi, I'm Stephen Smiley.
And I'm Angela Lapierre, and we're from the ABC's daily news podcast, The Signal. In 1979 at Luna Park in Sydney, the ghost train caught fire. Police said it was caused by an electrical fault, but for decades there have been rumours of arson.
Today on The Signal, what really happened at Luna Park 41 years ago, and what does it say about how high up the underworld's connections in Australia go? Look for The Signal on the ABC Listen app or wherever you get your podcasts.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.